Ethan Ward was never born a hero. He was an ordinary young man from a small American town, broken by tragedy and silenced by fear. But when corruption stole lives in the dead of night, Ethan chose not to look away. His story is not just about crime, it's about courage, about how one man's decision to fight back against darkness proved that even in the most broken places, hope can rise again. This is the journey of Ethan Ward and how he showed the world that fixing the world begins with a single act of bravery. Please subscribe for daily new update, crime story, and watch till end. Riverdale was the kind of town that looked picture perfect from the outside. Neatly painted houses lined the streets. Children played in small parks and neighbors greeted one another with polite smiles. But beneath that surface, darkness had taken root. Businesses were closing, young people were vanishing into drugs, and violence was spreading like a silent disease. The people who should have protected the community, the police, the leaders, the so-called pillars of society, turned their eyes away, pretending everything was fine. For those who lived there, it was clear that the town was falling apart, piece by piece, and no one seemed willing to stop it. Among the residents was a young man named Ethan Ward. He had grown up in Riverdale and remembered a time when the town had been full of life and hope. Back then, his father ran a small grocery store and his mother volunteered at community events. They believed in kindness, in helping others, in being honest even when it was hard. But Ethan's world had shattered the day his father was killed during a late-night robbery. The man responsible was never caught, and the case was quietly buried. Ethan's mother struggled to keep the family afloat, working long hours while carrying grief that never seemed to fade. Ethan learned early that life in Riverdale was unfair, and the system was designed to protect the powerful, not the innocent. As Ethan grew older, the bitterness inside him grew too. He walked through the streets and saw the lies behind the smiles. He saw families broken by addiction, children going hungry, and gangs openly running businesses without fear of the law. Every corner of the town whispered stories of betrayal. Ethan wanted to escape, to leave Riverdale behind, but something in him refused. This was his home, and every painful memory tied him to it. Even though he felt powerless, he carried the weight of his father's death like a silent fire in his chest. One evening, while walking home from work, Ethan stopped outside what used to be his father's store. Now it stood empty, boarded up, with broken glass scattered across the entrance. The sight filled him with both rage and sorrow. He thought about how his father had believed in fairness, about how he had died because someone wanted money more than a human life. The world seemed cruel beyond repair. Ethan clenched his fists and told himself there was nothing he could do. After all, what power did one man have against corruption, greed, and violence? It was easier to keep his head down, to survive quietly, to let the world collapse on its own. But deep down, Ethan felt a spark he couldn't ignore. As he walked away from the empty store, he didn't know that his life was about to change. He didn't know that soon he would face a choice that would test everything he believed in. He thought he was powerless, but fate was preparing him for something greater. The town was broken. The world seemed unfixable. Yet Ethan Ward was about to learn that even in the darkest places, a single decision can light a fire strong enough to challenge everything. The night the fire broke out was like any other in Riverdale. Quiet, heavy with silence, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Ethan was lying awake in his small bedroom when he heard the siren. At first he thought it was just another accident, another small tragedy in a place where suffering had become normal. But when he stepped outside and saw the thick black smoke rising into the sky, he knew this was something different. His feet carried him toward the flames before he even realized where he was going. The old shelter stood at the edge of town, a safe place for people who had nothing else. Ethan had passed it many times, seeing tired faces through the windows, single mothers, elderly men, children clutching worn toys. They were people who had lost nearly everything but still managed to smile when given a roof and a warm meal. Now, that building was engulfed in fire, its windows glowing like the eyes of some beast. Firefighters struggled to control the blaze, their shouts swallowed by the roar of the flames. Neighbors gathered in shock, whispering prayers, covering their mouths to hide the horror on their faces. When the fire finally died down, what remained was nothing but blackened ruins. 6 people were dead, including 2 small children who had been sleeping on the second floor. Their names spread quickly across Riverdale, turning into a haunting echo that refused to be forgotten. Ethan felt something break inside him when he saw their photographs in the local paper. Their smiles, frozen in time, were now a reminder of how cruel the world could be. He couldn't stop thinking about how easily it could have been prevented, how those children could still be alive if someone had cared enough to protect them. At first, the town grieved as if it were simply a tragic accident. But soon the truth began to leak out. Investigators revealed signs of gasoline in the rubble. The fire hadn't started naturally. It had been planned, set deliberately by someone who wanted the shelter destroyed. Rumors spread about land developers, gang leaders, and men in expensive suits who had been eyeing the property for months. The shelter had stood in the way of their deals, so they erased it, burning away lives as if they were nothing more than obstacles. The people of Riverdale were shocked, but not surprised. In a place where money ruled over justice, this was simply another crime written in ash. For Ethan, though, the fire was more than another story of corruption. It was personal. He could not shake the thought that his father's death and this crime were connected in spirit. Different tragedies born from the same disease of greed and disregard for human life. He stood in front of the ruins one evening, staring at the charred remains, and felt the spark in his chest grow hotter. Something inside him whispered that this could not go unanswered. The world was broken, but he no longer wanted to stand by and watch it fall apart. Without realizing it, the night of the fire became the moment when Ethan's life shifted. The man who had once believed himself powerless now felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. If no one else would fight, maybe it was time he did. Ethan could not escape the images of the shelter fire. The smoke, the screams, the faces of the children lost, all of it followed him into his dreams. He told himself that someone would bring justice, that the police would investigate, but deep down, he already knew the truth. In Riverdale, crimes against the weak were rarely punished. Money had a way of silencing questions, and power had a way of burying evidence. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing changed. The official reports were vague. The news articles grew shorter, and soon people began to move on. But Ethan could not move on. Something inside him whispered that if he didn't act, no one else would. It began with quiet observation. Ethan started spending his evenings near the downtown bars, places where businessmen and gang members mingled in secret. He noticed who shook hands in dark corners, who carried envelopes that bulged with cash, who stepped out of black cars with tinted windows. He kept his distance, blending in as if he were invisible, but his mind was sharp, wording every detail. Slowly, a pattern began to form. The same faces appeared again and again. The wealthy developer known for buying properties at impossible prices, a councilman who promised change but delivered nothing, and a man whose name carried fear through the streets, the leader of Riverdale's most violent gang. The more Ethan watched, the clearer it became that the fire was no isolated crime. It was part of a web, each thread connecting one powerful figure to another. Land deals, construction projects, drug operations, they all fed into the same network. The shelter had simply been standing in the way, a small light in a town that thrived on darkness. They had extinguished it, not out of anger, but out of calculation. To them, those lives had been nothing more than numbers on a ledger. One night, Ethan followed a developer's car out to the edge of town. It pulled into a warehouse, its windows glowing dimly in the night. Ethan stayed in the shadows, his heart pounding, as men carried boxes inside. He didn't need to see what was inside to know it was illegal. He took photos with an old camera, his hands shaking but steady enough to capture what mattered. It was the first piece of evidence he had, and it filled him with a strange mix of fear and determination. But the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. Ethan noticed unfamiliar faces watching him on the street. A black SUV seemed to appear too often behind him on his way home. He knew he was being noticed, and once they realized he wasn't just an observer, he would become a target. That thought should have scared him into silence, but instead it hardened his resolve. He had uncovered something rotten at the core of Riverdale, something that stretched far beyond one fire. Every document he copied, every photo he captured, every whispered conversation he overheard became fuel for his mission. He wasn't just looking for justice anymore. He was building a case, one strong enough to tear apart the web of corruption that had strangled his town for years. Ethan had once believed he was powerless, but now he knew the truth. Power belonged to those who dared to see what others ignored, to those who had the courage to act when silence was easier. And though he stood alone in the shadows, Ethan Ward was no longer afraid of the darkness. He was learning how to fight it. Ethan had been careful, but caution could only take him so far. The men he was watching were not ordinary criminals. They were people who built their power on fear, and fear made them sensitive to anyone who might expose them. It started with small warnings, a note left on his car windshield with no words. Only a burned matchstick taped to the paper. A stranger brushing past him on the street and whispering his name. At first Ethan told himself it was paranoia, but soon the truth became undeniable. They knew he was watching. One evening, after finishing a shift at the warehouse where he worked part-time, Ethan walked home through a quiet back street. The air was heavy and still, too quiet for the hour. He felt the presence before he saw them, shadows slipping out from an alley, footsteps quickening behind him. 3 men closed in. They wore hooded jackets, their faces hidden, but their intent was clear. Ethan tried to run, but they caught him, forcing him into the darkness between buildings. The blows came fast, fists to his ribs, a kick to his chest, the sting of knuckles across his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, pain shooting through his body as one of the men leaned close and whispered a warning, "Stay out of things that don't concern you." Then they were gone, leaving him bleeding and gasping against the cold brick wall. For hours he lay there, struggling to pull himself up. His mind swirled with anger and fear. He could walk away now, pretend none of this had ever happened, and perhaps he would live. But every throb of pain reminded him of the children who had died in the fire, of the families torn apart, of his father's death years ago. Walking away might save his body, but it would destroy his soul. As he dragged himself home, Ethan realized something important. The attack had not silenced him, it had transformed him. The criminals had shown him how much they feared the truth. That fear was proof that he was close to something powerful, something they could not afford to let the world see. The days that followed were hard. His body healed slowly, but his determination grew faster than the bruises faded. He upgraded from taking notes in a notebook to creating hidden files, digital backups of every photo and document he collected. He avoided routine, changing the paths he walked and the hours he moved. Every precaution he took reminded him of the risks, but also of the purpose. If he stopped now, their violence would mean nothing more than another scare tactic. If he continued, it could mean the beginning of their downfall. For the first time, Ethan stopped seeing himself as a victim of the town's corruption. He had become a player in the fight, someone who could shape the future of Riverdale. Fear no longer held him. Instead, it fueled him. The attack had been meant to break his spirit, but it had done the opposite. It had given him clarity. If the world was broken, it was not because evil was too strong, but because too many people refused to fight back. Ethan decided that from this point forward, he would never step back again. The evidence Ethan had collected was no longer just scraps of paper and blurry photographs. It had grown into a body of proof so heavy that even the most powerful men in Riverdale would struggle to deny it. Hidden bank records, property transfers under false names, secret meetings in warehouses. All of it painted a picture of a town ruled by greed and violence. Ethan spent countless nights piecing everything together, his room filling with files, maps and notes connected by strings of red thread. He wasn't simply watching anymore. He was preparing for war. But he knew the truth meant nothing if it stayed in his hands. He needed to release it where no one could silence him. The challenge was enormous. These men controlled the local police, the newspapers, even parts of the government. If he handed it directly to authorities, it would vanish into a drawer, buried forever. Instead, Ethan looked beyond Riverdale. He found contact with independent journalists, people known for refusing bribes, reporters who had exposed corruption in other cities. He sent pieces of his evidence anonymously at first, testing the waters, watching as small articles appeared online. Then, with growing confidence, he released everything. The reaction was explosive. One morning, Riverdale woke to headlines that screamed about corruption, organized crime, and politics selling the town piece by piece. Photos of secret deals and leaked recordings spread across the internet. People who had once felt powerless now had proof of what they had always suspected. Anger flooded the streets. Citizens demanded answers. Crowds gathered outside government buildings, and voices that had been silent for years rose up in fury. The criminals tried to fight back. They called the evidence fake, claimed it was a smear campaign, but the weight of proof was too much to dismiss. Journalists from outside Riverdale came in droves, cameras flashing, questions flying. Under pressure, higher authorities who weren't tied to the local corruption were forced to act. Arrests began. First the smaller players, then the bigger ones. Businessmen in suits, a councilman who had smiled in every election photo, even police officers once considered untouchable were led away in handcuffs. Each arrest sent shockwaves through the town. For years people had whispered about these men, but had never believed they would see justice. Now justice was walking them straight into courtrooms. Ethan watched it all unfold from the shadows, his identity still hidden from the public. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition. It was enough to see Riverdale finally breathing again, its people lifting their heads with a sense of safety they hadn't felt in years. The streets grew quieter at night, businesses reopened, and children played without fear. The scars of corruption would take time to heal, but for the first time, there was hope. Yet deep down, Ethan understood that this was not the end. The fight against corruption was bigger than one town. Evil had roots in every city, every system, feeding on silence and fear. What he had done in Riverdale could be done elsewhere, if people had the courage to resist. He had lit a fire, and now it was spreading. The criminals had tried to silence him with violence, but his voice had become louder than they could ever imagine. Ethan had proven that truth, once revealed, is stronger than any weapon. Ethan never imagined that the fight he started in Riverdale would carry beyond the borders of his town. But change has a way of spreading when people see proof that it is possible. After the arrests, his identity began to surface. The journalists who had worked with him revealed his name, and suddenly the quiet young man who once felt invisible became the subject of headlines. Some called him reckless, others called him brave. But to the people of Riverdale, Ethan was a symbol that one voice could challenge the silence of many. Invitations began arriving from schools, universities, and community groups across the country. People wanted to hear his story, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. At first Ethan was hesitant. He had never sought attention, and the idea of standing before crowds made his chest tighten. But then he remembered the night of the shelter fire, the faces of the children who never had the chance to grow up, and he understood that his story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were powerless. So he stood before the first audience, nervous but determined, and spoke about corruption, about fear, and about the moment he decided not to look away. His words were simple, but they carried weight because they came from truth. The more he spoke, the more he realized that people were desperate for hope. In cities far bigger than Riverdale, citizens told him their stories of injustice, violence, and betrayal. They spoke of broken systems, of leaders who failed them, of dreams destroyed by greed. Ethan listened, and then he reminded them that fixing the world didn't mean changing everything at once. It meant starting with one act of courage, one refusal to stay silent, one decision to protect what was right even when it was dangerous. He told them that every person carried the same fire he had carried, and that fire could spread if they dared to let it burn. Soon, Ethan's message reached beyond America. His story was translated into other languages, shared across borders, and discussed in places where corruption and fear were everyday realities. Letters poured in from people he had never met, thanking him for showing that the fight against injustice wasn't hopeless. Some wrote that they had started local initiatives, exposing wrongdoing in their own communities. Others confessed they had been ready to give up, but his words had made them stand again. Ethan realized that the true power of his journey wasn't the downfall of Riverdale's criminals. It was the awakening of ordinary people who had forgotten their strength. Standing on a stage one evening, looking out at thousands of faces, Ethan spoke the words that had guided him since the beginning. If you want to fix the world, you must first refuse to accept its brokenness. He told them that change was not the duty of the powerful alone. It was the responsibility of everyone who believed in justice. The applause that followed was not just for him, but for the idea that hope could be stronger than fear. Riverdale was healing, but Ethan's mission had become far larger. He was no longer just a survivor of tragedy or a fighter of corruption. He had become a messenger, reminding the world that one person can light a fire bright enough to chase away the shadows. And as he left the stage that night, Ethan Ward knew that his journey was far from over, because fixing the world was not a single act, but a lifetime of choices, made with courage.